The opulent Castillo mansion stood proudly atop the highest hill in Los Angeles, its gleaming white facade a beacon of wealth and power that could be seen for miles. Inside, the air was thick with tension as Robert Castillo, the silver-haired patriarch of the Castillo Empire, paced back and forth in his study. His fingers drummed nervously against the crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand, the amber liquid sloshing with each agitated step. "This is madness, absolute madness," he muttered, his voice a low growl that seemed to reverberate off the mahogany-paneled walls. The cause of his distress? His only son and heir, Daniel, had just dropped a bombshell that threatened to shake the very foundations of their carefully cultivated social standing. Daniel Castillo, with his chiseled jawline and piercing green eyes that had graced the covers of countless magazines, was engaged to be married. Under normal circumstances, this would be cause for celebration. The union of the Castillo heir with another blue-blooded debutante would have been the social event of the decade. But Daniel's choice of bride had sent shockwaves through the upper echelons of Los Angeles society. For Daniel had fallen in love with Ana Suarez, a mere maid who worked in the very mansion where he had grown up. A soft knock at the door interrupted Robert's brooding. "Enter," he barked, turning to face the intruder with a scowl. The door creaked open, revealing Daniel's tall, athletic frame. At 28, he was the spitting image of Robert in his youth, save for the determined set of his jaw and the fire that burned in his eyes. "Father," he said, his voice steady despite the tension that crackled between them. "We need to talk." Robert's grip tightened on his glass. "There's nothing to discuss, Daniel. This infatuation of yours ends now. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? To our reputation?" Daniel stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "This isn't an infatuation, Father. I love Ana. She's the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." "Love?" Robert spat the word out as if it were poison. "What do you know of love? She's a gold digger, Daniel. Can't you see that? She's after our money, our name." The younger Castillo's eyes flashed dangerously. "You don't know her, Father. Ana is the most genuine, kind-hearted person I've ever met. She doesn't care about our money or our name. She loves me for who I am, not what I have." Robert let out a bitter laugh. "And I suppose it's just a coincidence that she, a penniless maid, has managed to ensnare the heir to one of the largest fortunes in California? Don't be naive, son." "Ensnare?" Daniel's voice rose, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "Is it so hard for you to believe that someone might love me for reasons other than our wealth? Ana has worked here for years, Father. She's seen the best and worst of this family, and she's stood by my side through all of it." The elder Castillo slammed his glass down on the antique desk, the sharp sound echoing through the room. "And what about your mother? Have you thought about how this will affect her? The shame, the scandal." "Mother adores Ana," Daniel countered, his voice softening slightly. "She sees what I see in her, a beautiful soul who brings out the best in me." Robert turned away, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling Castillo estate. The manicured lawns and glittering pool below seemed to mock him, reminders of the lifestyle he had worked so hard to build and maintain. "You're throwing away everything I've built for you, everything I've sacrificed to give you the best life possible." Daniel took a step closer to his father, his voice low and intense. "No, Father, I'm building something of my own. Something real, something based on love and mutual respect, not just money and status." For a long moment, silence reigned in the study. Robert's shoulders sagged, the fight seeming to drain out of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're really going to go through with this, aren't you?" "Yes," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I'm going to marry Ana, with or without your blessing. But I'd rather have you by my side, Father. I want you to get to know her, to see her the way I do." Robert turned back to face his son, his expression unreadable. "And if I refuse? If I cut you off, disinherit you?" Daniel met his father's gaze unflinchingly. "Then I'll walk away. Ana and I will make our own way in the world." "But is that really what you want, Father? To lose your only son over this?" The tension in the room was palpable as father and son stared each other down, neither willing to back down. Just as it seemed the standoff would continue indefinitely, a soft knock at the door broke the silence. "Come in," Robert called out, his voice gruff. The door opened to reveal a petite figure with long, raven black hair and warm brown eyes. Ana Suarez stepped into the room, her simple maid's uniform a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Despite the circumstances, she held herself with a quiet dignity that was impossible to ignore. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But I thought it was time we all talked together." Robert's eyes narrowed as he regarded the young woman who had captured his son's heart. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. A nagging sense of familiarity that tugged at the edges of his memory. As Ana moved further into the room, coming to stand beside Daniel, Robert's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, superimposed over Ana's features, he saw the ghost of another face. A face he hadn't seen in nearly 3 decades, but one he could never forget. "It can't be," he whispered, his face paling as the impossible truth began to dawn on him. Daniel, oblivious to his father's sudden shock, placed a protective arm around Ana's waist. "Father, please, just give her a chance. Get to know Ana, and you'll see why I love her." But Robert barely heard his son's words. His mind was reeling, racing back through the years to a summer long ago, to a passionate affair that he had buried deep in his past. An affair with a beautiful young woman from the wrong side of the tracks, a woman who had disappeared without a trace, taking with her a secret that could destroy everything. As he stared at Ana, at her familiar eyes and the curve of her cheek, a cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach. Because if his suspicions were correct, if the impossible was true, then the scandal of his son marrying a maid would pale in comparison to the truth. For Ana Suarez might be more than just the woman Daniel loved. She might be the daughter Robert never knew he had. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he staggered back, gripping the edge of his desk for support. Daniel and Ana exchanged worried glances, confused by his sudden change in demeanor. "Father, are you all right?" Daniel asked, concern evident in his voice. Robert forced himself to take a deep breath, to school his features into a mask of composure. He couldn't reveal his suspicions, not yet. Not until he was certain. But one thing was clear, he needed to buy time. I need some time to think," he managed to say, his voice rough. "This is a lot to process. Daniel, Ana, I won't stand in your way. But please, give me some time to adjust to the idea." The young couple's faces lit up with cautious hope. "Of course, Father," Daniel said, relief evident in his voice. "Take all the time you need. We're just happy you're willing to consider it." As Daniel and Ana left the study, their hands intertwined, Robert sank heavily into his leather chair. His mind was a whirlwind of memories and questions. How could this be possible? Could Ana really be his daughter? And if she was, what would that mean for her relationship with Daniel? One thing was certain, he needed answers, and he needed them fast. Because if his worst fears were confirmed, the impending wedding wouldn't just be a social scandal. It would be a tragedy that could tear his family apart forever. With trembling hands, Robert reached for his phone. It was time to dig up the past he had so carefully buried. Time to find the woman he had loved and lost all those years ago. Because somewhere in her story lay the truth that could change everything. As the sun began to set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the Castillo estate, the stage was set for a drama that would shake the very foundations of the city's elite. Love, secrets, and long-buried truths were about to collide in a perfect storm of emotion and revelation. And at the center of it all stood Ana Suarez, a simple maid with a secret that could bring an empire crashing down. The following morning dawned bright and clear over Los Angeles, but within the walls of the Castillo mansion, a storm was brewing. Robert Castillo had barely slept, his mind plagued by memories of the past and fears for the future. As he descended the grand staircase, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, he was met by the concerned gaze of his wife, Isabella. "Robert, darling, are you all right?" Isabella asked, her perfectly manicured hand reaching out to touch his arm. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." If only she knew how close to the truth she was, Robert thought grimly. "I'm fine, my dear," he lied smoothly, years of boardroom negotiations coming to his aid. Just a bit overwhelmed by Daniel's news, that's all. Isabella's face softened with understanding. I know it's not what we expected, but Ana is a lovely girl. Give her a chance, Robert. For Daniel's sake. Robert nodded absently, his mind already racing ahead to the task at hand. He needed to find Maria Suarez, the woman he had loved and lost so many years ago. If Ana was indeed their daughter, Maria would be the key to unraveling this impossible situation. As if summoned by his thoughts, Ana appeared at the foot of the stairs, her simple maid's uniform a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Castillo, she said softly, her eyes downcast in a show of respect that now seemed painfully ironic to Robert. Ana, dear, Isabella said warmly, how many times must I tell you? Call us Robert and Isabella. You're family now. Family. The word echoed in Robert's mind, taking on a whole new meaning. He watched as Ana's face lit up with a smile, and the resemblance to Maria hit him like a physical blow. How had he not seen it before? Thank you, Isabella, Ana replied, her voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you know. Robert couldn't bear it any longer. If you'll excuse me, he muttered, brushing past them and heading for his study. He needed to make some calls, to set in motion the investigation that would either confirm his worst fears or lay them to rest. As the door to his study closed behind him, Robert missed the concerned look that passed between his wife and Ana. He also missed the shadow that flitted across Ana's face, a fleeting expression of guilt and fear that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Meanwhile, in another part of the sprawling mansion, Daniel Castillo was on cloud nine. He hummed to himself as he got dressed, his heart light with the knowledge that his father had, however reluctantly, given his blessing to the marriage. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, a knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Come in, he called out, expecting to see Ana. Instead, it was his best friend and business partner, Marco Hernandez, who entered the room. Well, Marco said with a grin, if it isn't the man of the hour. I hear congratulations are in order. Daniel turned to face his friend, his own smile faltering slightly at the hint of sarcasm in Marco's voice. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Marco crossed the room, helping himself to a glass of water from the carafe on Daniel's desk. So, you're really going through with this? Marrying the help? Daniel's eyes flashed with anger. Watch it, Marco. Ana's not the help. She's the woman I love. Marco held up his hands in a placating gesture. Hey, no offense meant. I'm just looking out for you, bro. Have you really thought this through? What it could mean for your future, for the company? Of course I have, Daniel replied, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. Ana makes me happy, Marco. Happier than I've ever been. Isn't that what matters? Marco sighed, setting down his glass and fixing Daniel with a serious look. Look, I get it. She's beautiful, she's sweet, she makes you feel like a regular guy instead of Daniel Castillo, heir to billions. But wake up, man. This isn't a fairy tale. There are going to be consequences. Daniel turned away, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured grounds of the estate. I don't care about the consequences, he said softly. I love her, Marco. I want to build a life with her, consequences be damned. As the two friends continued their heated discussion, neither noticed the figure lurking just outside the door, listening intently to every word. Ana pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come to surprise Daniel with breakfast in bed, a small gesture to celebrate their engagement. Instead, she found herself eavesdropping on a conversation that filled her with a mixture of love for Daniel and fear for the future. Ana knew that marrying Daniel would change her life forever. She had grown up in poverty, the daughter of a single mother who had worked herself to the bone to provide for her child. The Castillo mansion had been her escape, a chance at a better life. But it had also been where she had fallen in love, truly and deeply, with a man who saw beyond her humble background. As she listened to Daniel defend their love, tears welled up in her eyes. She loved him with every fiber of her being, but Marco's words struck a chord of fear in her heart. What if he was right? What if their love wasn't enough to overcome the vast differences in their backgrounds? And then there was the secret. The terrible, wonderful secret that she had carried with her for years. The truth about her past that could destroy everything she held dear. Ana closed her eyes, fighting back the wave of guilt that threatened to overwhelm her. She had to tell Daniel the truth, and soon. Before it was too late. Gathering her courage, Ana knocked softly on the door, plastering a smile on her face as she entered the room. "Good morning, my love," she said, her voice only slightly betraying her inner turmoil. "I brought you breakfast." Daniel's face lit up at the sight of her, all traces of his argument with Marco forgotten. "Ana, you shouldn't have," he said, crossing the room to plant a kiss on her cheek. Marco watched the interaction with a mixture of skepticism and resignation. "I should go," he said, heading for the door. "Congratulations again, you two." As Marco left, closing the door behind him, Daniel turned to Ana with a concerned look. "Are you okay, M.I. Amor? You look pale." Ana forced her smile to widen, shaking her head. "I'm fine, just a little tired. There's so much to do, with the wedding and all." Daniel pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "Don't worry about a thing. We'll hire the best wedding planner in LA. You won't have to lift a finger." His words, meant to be comforting, only intensified Ana's guilt. Here she was, accepted into this world of wealth and privilege, all while hiding a truth that could shatter everything. She pulled back slightly, looking up into Daniel's trusting eyes. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something important." But before she could continue, a commotion from downstairs interrupted them. Raised voices echoed through the mansion, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Daniel and Ana exchanged worried glances before rushing out of the room and down the stairs. They arrived in the foyer to find a scene of chaos. Robert Castillo stood in the center of the room, his face ashen, staring at a woman Ana had never seen before. The woman, elegant despite her obvious distress, was shouting at Robert in rapid-fire Spanish. "How dare you?" the woman cried, switching to heavily accented English. "After all these years, you think you can just summon me like one of your servants?" Robert held up his hands, trying to calm the situation. "Maria, please. I can explain." Ana froze on the stairs, her blood running cold. "Maria, it couldn't be." She stared at the woman, taking in her familiar features, the eyes so like her own. It was impossible, and yet. "Mama?" Ana whispered, her voice barely audible above the commotion. But it was enough. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Ana. Maria's anger faded, replaced by a look of shock and fear. Robert's suspicions were confirmed in that single word, his worst fears realized. Daniel looked between Ana and the newcomer, confusion evident on his face. "Ana? What's going on? Who is this woman?" Ana felt the world spinning around her. This was it, the moment she had dreaded for so long. The truth was about to come out, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Maria took a step towards the stairs, her eyes never leaving Ana's face. "My hija," she breathed, tears welling up in her eyes. "My Ana." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella Castillo, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror, was the first to break it. "Robert," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "what is the meaning of this?" Robert seemed to age years in a matter of seconds. He turned to his wife, his shoulders sagging with the weight of his guilt. "Isabella, I can explain." But Ana knew it was too late for explanations. The truth was out, hanging in the air like a poisonous cloud. She looked at Daniel, seeing the dawning realization in his eyes, the hurt and betrayal that was rapidly replacing his confusion. "Daniel," she said, reaching out to him. But he jerked away from her touch, stumbling back as if burned. "No," he said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "No, this can't be happening." Ana felt her heart breaking as she watched the man she loved recoil from her. She wanted to explain, to tell him that she hadn't known, not for sure. That she had only suspected, had only recently begun to piece together the fragments of her past. But the words wouldn't come. As the full impact of the revelation began to sink in, the Castillo mansion erupted into chaos once more. Accusations flew, tears were shed, and long-buried secrets came rushing to the surface. In the midst of it all, Ana stood frozen, watching as the life she had dreamed of crumbled around her. She had come to the Castillo mansion seeking a better life, had found love beyond her wildest dreams. But now, as the truth of her parentage came to light, Ana realized that her fairy tale had been built on a foundation of lies and half-truths. The question now was whether love, Daniel's love for her, and hers for him, could survive this devastating revelation. As the sun climbed higher in the Los Angeles sky, casting harsh light on the scene unfolding within the mansion's walls, one thing became crystal clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The Castillo family, once the pinnacle of high society, now stood on the brink of a scandal that threatened to tear them apart. And at the center of it all stood Ana, the maid who had dared to dream of a life beyond her station, now revealed to be the living embodiment of Robert Castillo's greatest sin. As she looked around at the shattered remnants of the life she had almost had, Ana realized that her journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The Castillo mansion, once a bastion of wealth and privilege, had become a battleground of emotions. In the days following the explosive revelation of Ana's true parentage, an uneasy calm had settled over the estate, but it was a calm fraught with tension, like the eerie stillness before a devastating storm. Ana had moved out of the mansion, unable to bear the weight of the accusing glances and whispered conversations that followed her every move. She now found herself in a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, a far cry from the luxury she had grown accustomed to. As she sat on the threadbare couch, staring at the peeling wallpaper, she couldn't help but wonder how everything had gone so terribly wrong. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Ana's heart leapt, hoping against hope that it might be Daniel. But when she opened the door, she found herself face to face with Maria, the mother she had never truly known. "May I come in?" Maria asked, her voice soft and hesitant. Ana nodded, stepping aside to allow her mother entry. The two women stood awkwardly in the small living room, years of separation and secrets hanging heavy between them. "I'm so sorry, hija," Maria finally said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Ana felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. "Then why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you keep this from me all these years?" Maria sank onto the couch, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her guilt. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "When I found out I was pregnant with Robert's child, I was terrified. He was already married, already had a son. I knew there was no place for us in his world. So you ran away," Ana finished, the pieces of her fragmented past finally falling into place. Maria nodded, unable to meet her daughter's eyes. "I convinced myself it was for the best. That you would have a better life without the complications of being Robert Castillo's illegitimate daughter. I never imagined that I would fall in love with my own brother," Ana said bitterly. "Ana, please," Maria reached out, grasping her daughter's hand. "Daniel isn't your brother, not by blood." Ana's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What? But Robert. Robert isn't Daniel's biological father," Maria explained, her voice heavy with the weight of long-buried truths. "Isabella, she had an affair, years ago. Robert agreed to raise Daniel as his own to avoid a scandal." The revelation hit Ana like a physical blow. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. "Does Daniel know?" Maria shook her head. "I don't think so. Robert told me in confidence, years ago, when we were together." Ana sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her. The truth she had feared, the reason she had run from the Castillo mansion, had been a lie. Daniel wasn't her brother. They could be together, after all. But would he ever forgive her for running away? For not trusting him with the truth? As Ana grappled with this new information, across town, Daniel Castillo was waging a battle of his own. He sat in his father's study, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, staring at the man he had always believed to be his father. "Why now?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse from days of angry silences and tearful confrontations. "After all these years, why did you decide to dig up the past?" Robert Castillo looked every bit his age, the stress of the past few days etched deeply into the lines of his face. I had to know, he said simply. When I saw Ana, when I realized who she might be. I couldn't let you marry her without knowing the truth. Daniel laughed bitterly. The truth? That's rich, coming from you. Have you ever told the truth a day in your life, father? Or should I even call you that? Robert flinched at the venom in his son's voice. Daniel, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But there's something else you need to know. What? More family secrets? More lies? Daniel spat, rising to his feet. I've had enough of your truths. You're not my biological son, Robert said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Daniel froze, his anger giving way to shock. What? Robert sighed heavily, suddenly looking very old and very tired. Your mother, she had an affair, years ago. When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. I agreed to raise you as my own, to protect her, to protect you from scandal. Daniel sank back into his chair, his mind spinning. Does Ana know? No, Robert shook his head. At least, I don't think so. I only told Maria, years ago, when you were having your own affair, Daniel finished, his voice flat. Robert nodded, unable to meet his son's eyes. I'm so sorry, Daniel. For everything. As the two men sat in silence, each grappling with the weight of these new revelations, across the city, another drama was unfolding. Isabella Castillo, the woman at the center of so many secrets, was packing her bags. She moved through her luxurious bedroom with purpose, filling suitcases with designer clothes and priceless jewelry. As she zipped up the last bag, a soft knock at the door made her pause. Come in, she called, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. Marco Hernandez, Daniel's best friend and business partner, stepped into the room. His eyes widened as he took in the packed bags. Going somewhere, Mrs. Castillo? Isabella straightened, fixing Marco with a steely gaze. I think it's time I took a little vacation, don't you? Things are rather tense around here at the moment. Marco nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. And does Mr. Castillo know about this vacation? Robert has more than enough to deal with right now, Isabella said dismissively. I'm sure he'll hardly notice I'm gone. As she turned back to her bags, Marco stepped closer. Isabella, he said softly, using her first name for perhaps the first time. Are you sure this is wise? Running away won't solve anything. Isabella whirled to face him, her carefully composed mask slipping for a moment to reveal the pain and fear beneath. And what would you have me do, Marco? Stay here and watch as my family falls apart? As the truth about Daniel's father comes out? Marco's eyes widened in shock. You know, about Daniel's real father? Isabella laughed bitterly. Of course I know. I've lived with that secret for nearly 3 decades. And now, with all of this. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the chaos of the past few days. It's only a matter of time before everyone knows. Marco stepped forward, grasping Isabella's hands in his own. Then stay, he urged. Face it head on. You're stronger than you think, Isabella. Running away will only make things worse. For a moment, Isabella allowed herself to lean into Marco's strength, to draw comfort from his presence. But then she stiffened, pulling away. You don't understand, she said softly. I can't face him. I can't face any of them. Who? Marco pressed. Robert? Daniel? Isabella shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. Daniel's father, she whispered. He's back in town. He wants to meet Daniel, to tell him the truth. Marco felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. The implications of Isabella's words were staggering. Does Robert know? Not yet, Isabella said, wiping away her tears with an angry gesture. But he will soon enough. And when he does. She left the sentence unfinished, but Marco could fill in the blanks. When Robert found out that Daniel's biological father was not only alive but back in Los Angeles, the fragile peace that had settled over the Castillo family would shatter completely. As Isabella resumed her packing, her movements now tinged with a frantic energy, Marco found himself torn. His loyalty to Daniel, his best friend, warred with his growing feelings for Isabella and his desire to protect her. In the end, he made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. I'll go with you, he said suddenly. Isabella paused, looking at him in surprise. What? I'll go with you, Marco repeated, more firmly this time. You shouldn't be alone right now. Let me help you, Isabella. For a long moment, Isabella stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit or ulterior motive. Finding only sincerity and concern, she slowly nodded. All right, she said softly. But we leave tonight, before anyone can stop us. As Marco left to pack his own bags, Isabella sank onto the edge of her bed, her head in her hands. She knew she was being a coward, running away from the mess she had created. But the thought of facing Robert, of seeing the betrayal in Daniel's eyes when he learned the truth, it was more than she could bear. Little did she know that her decision to flee, and Marco's choice to accompany her, would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of Los Angeles society and forever alter the lives of everyone involved. As night fell over the city, casting long shadows across the Castillo estate, the players in this unfolding drama found themselves at a crossroads. Ana, armed with the knowledge that Daniel wasn't her brother, wrestled with whether to reach out to him or let him go. Daniel, reeling from the revelation that Robert wasn't his biological father, struggled to make sense of his place in the world. Robert, burdened by the weight of his secrets and lies, sought a way to make amends to the people he had. And somewhere in the city, a man unknown to most of them prepared to step out of the shadows and claim his place in their lives. Daniel's real father, a figure from Isabella's past, was about to enter the stage, bringing with him revelations that would turn their world upside down once more. As a warm breeze swept through the palm-lined streets of Los Angeles, carrying with it the promise of change and the scent of impending storm, the stage was set for the next act in this gripping saga of love, betrayal, and long-buried secrets. The Castillo family, once the pinnacle of wealth and respectability, stood on the brink of collapse. But from the ashes of their carefully constructed facade, would a new understanding arise? Could love, between Ana and Daniel, between Robert and his family, between Marco and Isabella, survive the harsh light of truth? Only time would tell. And in Los Angeles, where dreams were born and shattered with equal frequency, time was a currency as precious as gold. As midnight approached, a series of events was set in motion that would irrevocably change the course of their lives. Ana, gathering her courage, picked up her phone to call Daniel. Daniel, his conversation with Robert finally over, stepped out into the night, desperate for some air and clarity. Isabella and Marco slipped out of the Castillo mansion, their bags packed, ready to leave their old lives behind. And in a small cafe on Sunset Boulevard, a man sat alone, staring at an old photograph of a woman who looked remarkably like Isabella Castillo. He signaled for the check, his mind made up. It was time to reclaim the life, and the son, he had left behind so many years ago. The pieces were in place. The die was cast. And as the new day dawned, bringing with it the promise of confrontation and resolution, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The pre-dawn hours in Los Angeles were usually a time of quiet anticipation, the city holding its breath before the chaos of the day began. But on this particular morning, the air was electric with tension, as if the very atmosphere could sense the storm of emotions about to break. Ana's fingers trembled as she dialed Daniel's number, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would wake the neighbors. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as she was about to lose her nerve and hang up, she heard his voice. Ana? Daniel's tone was a mixture of surprise, hope, and wariness. Daniel, she breathed, relief flooding through her at the sound of his voice. I need to see you. There's something I have to tell you. Something important. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough for Ana's anxiety to spike. Then, okay, where? They agreed to meet at a small park near Ana's apartment, a neutral ground where they could talk without the weight of the Castillo mansion pressing down on them. As Ana hung up the phone, she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this mess. Across town, Daniel ended the call and stared out at the twinkling lights of the city below. He had left the mansion after his conversation with Robert, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere of lies and betrayal any longer. Now, standing on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, He felt a mix of anticipation and dread at the thought of seeing Ana again. What could she possibly have to tell him that would change anything? The truth of her parentage still stood between them like an insurmountable wall. And yet, the sound of her voice had awakened something in him, a longing he had been trying desperately to suppress. As Daniel turned to go back inside and prepare for the meeting, his phone buzzed again. Expecting it to be Ana, he was surprised to see Marco's name on the screen. He answered, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Marco? What's going on? It's the middle of the night." "Daniel," Marco's voice was tense, urgent. "I need to tell you something. It's about your mother." Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. "What about her?" "She's leaving, Daniel. Tonight. And I'm going with her." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. "What? What are you talking about? Where are you?" "We're at the airport," Marco replied, his voice heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry, man. I never meant for any of this to happen. But your mom, she needs someone right now, and..." "My mother needs someone?" Daniel interrupted, his voice rising in anger and disbelief. "What about me, Marco? What about your best friend?" There was a pause, and Daniel could hear muffled voices in the background. When Marco spoke again, his words sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "There's more, Daniel. Your mom, she says your real father is back in town. He wants to meet you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Daniel stumbled back, gripping the balcony railing for support. "My real father?" he whispered. "I'm sorry," Marco said again. "I have to go. We're boarding soon. Just be careful, okay? And don't be too hard on your mom. She's scared, Daniel." The line went dead, leaving Daniel standing alone in the pre-dawn darkness, his mind reeling from this latest bombshell. His mother was running away. His best friend was going with her. And his biological father, a man he had never known existed until a few hours ago, was in Los Angeles, wanting to meet him. For a moment, Daniel considered calling Ana and canceling their meeting. How could he face her with all of this swirling in his head? But then he realized that she was the one person who might understand, who had also had her world turned upside down by long-buried secrets. With a heavy sigh, Daniel grabbed his keys and headed out. Whatever Ana had to tell him, whatever came next, he knew he couldn't face it alone. As the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, two cars made their way through the early morning traffic of Los Angeles. In one, Ana clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. She rehearsed what she would say to Daniel over and over in her mind, praying that he would listen, that he would understand. In the other, Daniel drove on autopilot, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at his mother for running away, betrayal at Marco's decision to go with her, fear of what his biological father might want from him, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that whatever Ana had to tell him might somehow make sense of this chaos. As they both approached the park, neither was aware that they were being followed. In a sleek black car several lengths behind Daniel, a man watched intently, his eyes never leaving the young Castillo heir. This was the moment he had been waiting for, planning for nearly 3 decades. Javier Mendoza, successful businessman and Daniel's biological father, was about to reclaim the son he had never known. The park was deserted when Ana arrived, the early morning mist still clinging to the grass. She made her way to a bench near the small pond, her heart racing as she saw Daniel's car pull into the parking lot. He looked tired, she thought as he approached, the weight of the past few days evident in the slump of his shoulders and the dark circles under his eyes. But he was still the most beautiful man she had ever seen. "Ana," he said simply as he reached her. "Daniel," she replied, fighting the urge to throw herself into his arms. "Thank you for coming." They sat on the bench, a careful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the shore of the pond and the distant hum of the awakening city. "I have something to tell you," they both said simultaneously, then laughed softly at the coincidence. "You first," Daniel said, gesturing for Ana to continue. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Daniel, what I'm about to tell you, it changes everything. At least, I hope it does." She paused, gathering her courage. You're not my brother. Daniel blinked, confusion evident on his face. What? But Robert. Robert is my father, Ana confirmed. But he's not yours. Not biologically, at least. She watched as understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes, quickly followed by a myriad of other emotions: shock, disbelief, hope, fear. How do you know this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ana explained what her mother had told her, about Isabella's affair years ago, about Robert's agreement to raise Daniel as his own. As she spoke, she saw the tension begin to leave Daniel's body, replaced by a cautious hope. So we're not related, he said slowly, as if testing the words. Ana shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, we're not. Daniel, I'm so sorry I ran away. I should have trusted you, should have told you what I suspected. I was just so scared, and... Her words were cut off as Daniel surged forward, capturing her lips in a desperate, passionate kiss. Ana melted into him, all the fear and doubt of the past days dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Ana, he said softly. No matter what, that hasn't changed. I love you too, she replied, her heart soaring. More than anything. But their moment of joy was short-lived. Daniel pulled back slightly, his expression growing serious. Ana, there's something I need to tell you too. It's about my mother, and my real father. As Daniel began to explain about Isabella's flight and the revelation of his biological father's presence in Los Angeles, neither of them noticed the man approaching their bench, his steps purposeful and determined. Daniel Castillo? A deep voice interrupted them. They both looked up, startled. The man standing before them was tall and distinguished looking, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that were startlingly similar to Daniel's. Yes? Daniel replied warily, instinctively moving closer to Ana. The man's face softened, a mixture of longing and regret in his expression. My name is Javier Mendoza. I'm your father. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at the man, Javier, in shock, unable to form words. Ana squeezed his hand supportively, her own mind reeling from this latest development. I know this is a shock, Javier continued, his voice gentle. And I know I have no right to come into your life like this. But when I heard about the situation with the Castillo family, I knew I couldn't stay away any longer. Daniel found his voice at last, anger overtaking his shock. You knew? All this time, you knew about me, and you did nothing? Javier's face fell. It's complicated, Daniel. Your mother, Isabella and I, we were young. When she found out she was pregnant, she went back to Robert. She made me promise to stay away, for your sake. For my sake? Daniel scoffed. Or for the sake of her reputation? The Castillo name? Both, probably, Javier admitted. I won't lie to you, Daniel. I made mistakes. We all did. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right. I want to know my son. As Daniel struggled to process this, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. With an apologetic glance at Ana and a wary look at Javier, he answered. Daniel? It was Robert's voice, sounding frantic. Where are you? Your mother, she's gone. And Marco? I know, Daniel interrupted. Marco called me. They're at the airport. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You knew? And you didn't tell me? Daniel felt a surge of anger. Like you told me about not being my real father? Another pause, longer this time. When Robert spoke again, his voice was heavy with defeat. I deserve that. Daniel, please, come home. We need to talk about this, as a family. Daniel looked at Ana, then at Javier, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of concern and hope. I'm not sure I know what family means anymore, he said quietly. Then let's figure it out together, Robert pleaded. Please, son, I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. You're my son, biology be damned. Daniel felt tears prick at his eyes. Despite everything, despite the lies and the secrets, he couldn't deny the love in Robert's voice. The love of the man who had raised him, who had been there for every skinned knee and every triumph. Okay, he said finally. I'll come, but I'm bringing Ana, and And my biological father is here. He wants to talk. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Javier is there? Daniel, be careful. There's a lot you don't know. Then it's time I learned the truth, Daniel interrupted. All of it. We'll be there soon. As he hung up the phone, Daniel felt as though he was standing on the edge of a precipice. Behind him lay the life he had always known, built on a foundation of lies and half-truths. Before him stretched an unknown future, filled with new relationships and hard truths. He looked at Ana, the woman he loved, who had been through her own crucible of family secrets. He looked at Javier, the father he had never known, who now wanted to be part of his life. And he thought of Robert, waiting at home, the man who had raised him and loved him as his own. Are you ready for this? Ana asked softly, squeezing his hand. Daniel took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders. No, he admitted, but I don't think I ever will be. It's time to face the truth, all of it. As they made their way to their cars, the sun now fully risen and bathing Los Angeles in its golden light, Daniel felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Whatever happened next, he knew his life would never be the same. But with Ana by his side, and the promise of truth, painful though it might be, ahead of him, he felt ready to face whatever came next. As they drove towards the Castillo mansion, Javier following in his own car, none of them were aware of the scene unfolding at Los Angeles International Airport. Isabella Castillo stood at the gate, her ticket to Paris clutched in her hand, Marco by her side. But as the final boarding call echoed through the terminal, she found herself unable to move. Isabella? Marco said gently. We need to go. The plane. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. I can't, she whispered. I can't run away. Not again. Marco nodded, a mix of relief and resignation on his face. I know, he said softly. I think I've always known. As they watched the plane take off without them, Isabella made a decision that would change everything once again. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Robert, she said when he answered. I'm coming home. And I'm ready to tell the truth. All of it. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city of angels, the stage was set for a confrontation nearly 3 decades in the making. Secrets would be revealed, lies unraveled, and the true meaning of family would be tested as never before. In the Castillo mansion, Robert paced anxiously, awaiting the return of his son and the arrival of the man who shared his blood. In a car speeding through the streets of Los Angeles, Daniel grappled with the reality of 2 fathers and the woman he loved by his side. And in an airport terminal, Isabella and Marco turned their backs on escape, choosing instead to face the consequences of long-buried truths. The die was cast. The players were in motion. And as the city of Los Angeles awakened to a new day, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in its midst, the Castillo family stood on the brink of either destruction or redemption. Only time would tell which way the scales would tip. The Castillo mansion loomed before them, its grand facade a silent witness to the tumultuous events about to unfold within its walls. Daniel parked his car in the circular driveway, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he stared up at the place he had once called home. Now, it felt more like a battleground. Ana reached over, placing her hand gently on his. We're in this together, she said softly. Whatever happens. Daniel nodded, grateful for her presence. As they stepped out of the car, Javier pulled up behind them, his expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. Are you ready for this? Daniel asked his newfound father, a hint of challenge in his voice. Javier straightened his shoulders. I've been ready for this moment for 28 years, he replied. The question is, are you ready to hear the truth? Before Daniel could respond, the front door of the mansion swung open. Robert Castillo stood there, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, his eyes darting between Daniel, Ana, and Javier. Come in, he said, his voice strained. We have a lot to discuss. As they entered the opulent foyer, the tension in the air was palpable. Robert led them to the living room, where Maria, Ana's mother, was already seated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Maria? Ana gasped, surprised to see her mother there. What are you doing here? I called her, Robert explained. If we're going to lay all our cards on the table, Everyone involved should be present. They had barely taken their seats when the sound of a car pulling up outside caught their attention. Moments later, Isabella burst through the door, Marco closed behind her. "I'm not too late, am I?" she asked breathlessly, her eyes wide as she took in the gathered group. Her gaze landed on Javier, and she paled visibly. "Javier, you're here." "Hello, Isabella," Javier said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of old pain and unresolved longing. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the air thick with unspoken truths and simmering emotions. It was Daniel who finally broke the tension, his voice sharp with frustration. "All right, enough," he said, standing up. "I think it's time we all heard the truth. The whole truth. No more lies, no more secrets. Who wants to start?" Isabella stepped forward, her chin held high despite the tremor in her voice. "I will," she said. "It's time I took responsibility for the choices I made." All eyes turned to her as she began her tale. "It started nearly 30 years ago," Isabella said, her gaze flicking between Robert and Javier. "Robert and I had been married for a few years, but things were difficult. We were young, ambitious, more focused on building the Castillo empire than on our relationship." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "That's when I met Javier. He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. We began an affair." Robert's jaw clenched, but he remained silent, allowing his wife to continue. "When I found out I was pregnant," Isabella went on, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't know who the father was. I was terrified, confused. I went to Robert, confessed everything. And he offered to raise the child as his own, to avoid a scandal that could ruin both our reputations." Daniel listened, his emotions a turbulent mix of anger, confusion, and a strange sort of relief at finally knowing the truth. "So you just, what? Decided to pretend? To lie to me my entire life?" "We thought it was for the best," Robert interjected, his voice heavy with regret. "We wanted to give you a stable home, a good life. And as you grew, Daniel, you became my son in every way that mattered. Biology be damned." Javier leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Daniel. "I wanted to be part of your life," he said earnestly. "But Isabella made it clear that my presence would only complicate things. She asked me to stay away, for your sake." "For my sake?" Daniel scoffed. "Or for the sake of your precious reputations?" "Both," Isabella admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "I was young and scared, Daniel. I made choices I'm not proud of, but I thought I was protecting you." As the weight of these revelations settled over the room, Ana squeezed Daniel's hand supportively. But their moment of connection was interrupted by Maria, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing agitation. "Well, if we're all confessing our sins," she said, her voice trembling, "I suppose it's my turn." All eyes turned to her as she stood, her gaze fixed on Robert. "You weren't the only one with secrets, Robert," she said. "When I left all those years ago, when I found out I was pregnant with Ana, I didn't tell you the whole truth." Robert's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, Maria?" Maria took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Ana, she's not your only child. She has a twin brother." The room erupted into chaos. Ana stumbled back, shock written across her face. "A brother? What? How?" "His name is Carlos," Maria said, her words tumbling out now. "When I found out I was pregnant with twins, I panicked. I knew I couldn't provide for 2 children on my own, and I was too proud to ask for help. So when they were born, I gave Carlos up for adoption." The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. Robert sank into a chair, his face ashen. "Twins?" he whispered. "I have a son out there I never knew about?" Ana was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "How could you?" she asked her mother, her voice breaking. "How could you keep this from me? From us?" Maria reached for her daughter, but Ana pulled away. "I'm so sorry, hija," she pleaded. "I thought I was doing what was best. I've regretted it every day since." As the family grappled with this latest bombshell, Marco, who had been silently observing from the sidelines, suddenly spoke up. "Wait," he said, his voice filled with dawning realization. "Carlos. What's his last name?" Maria turned to him, confusion evident on her face. Mendez. Why? Marco's eyes widened. Carlos Mendez. I know him. He works for me, in my company's IT department. I hired him about 6 months ago. The room fell silent as the implications of this sank in. Daniel turned to Marco, his expression a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. You knew my brother, Ana's brother, and you never said anything? Marco held up his hands defensively. I had no idea. I mean, Carlos mentioned he was adopted, but I never made the connection. How could I? As the revelations continued to unfold, each more shocking than the last, the foundations of the Castillo family seemed to crumble. Lies were exposed, secrets laid bare, and the intricate web of relationships that had defined their lives for decades began to unravel. Isabella, overcome with the weight of her choices, sank to her knees. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just so scared. Robert moved to comfort her, but Daniel stepped between them, his expression hard. No, he said firmly. You don't get to play the victim here. Either of you. Your lies, your secrets, they've hurt everyone in this room. And for what? To protect your precious reputations? Javier stepped forward, reaching out to place a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Son, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But, Daniel shrugged off his touch. I'm not your son, he snapped. I'm not anyone's son right now. I don't even know who I am anymore. Ana moved to Daniel's side, wrapping an arm around his waist. You're the man I love, she said softly. That hasn't changed. For a moment, Daniel's expression softened as he looked at Ana. But then his gaze hardened again as he turned back to the others. I need time, he said. Time to process all of this. And I think I need to meet Carlos. Maria nodded, tears in her eyes. Of course. He deserves to know the truth too. As the weight of all that had been revealed settled over the room, a new silence fell. It was a silence heavy with the potential for healing, but also fraught with the possibility of further pain and division. Robert, looking older than he ever had, finally broke the silence. Where do we go from here? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was Ana who answered, her voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions she was feeling. We start over, she said. We tell the truth, all of it. To Carlos, to the world if we have to. No more lies, no more secrets. It's the only way we can move forward. Daniel nodded, squeezing Ana's hand. She's right. It's time we all face the consequences of our actions. No matter how painful it might be. As the group began to discuss the practicalities of reaching out to Carlos and dealing with the inevitable fallout of their family secrets, a new energy filled the room. It was an energy of cautious hope, of the possibility of redemption and healing. But even as they began to plan for the future, the ghosts of the past lingered. Isabella and Javier exchanged a look filled with unresolved feelings and unanswered questions. Robert watched Daniel with a mixture of love and fear, uncertain of his place in his son's life now that the truth was out. And Maria sat quietly, the weight of her long-held secret finally lifted, but the consequences of her choices still to be fully realized. As the sun began to set over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the Castillo estate, the family that had been built on lies and secrets took its first tentative steps towards honesty and reconciliation. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in decades, they were facing it together, with the truth as their guide. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turbulence that had engulfed the Castillo mansion the night before. Daniel and Ana had spent the night in his old room, both too exhausted and overwhelmed to contemplate leaving. As they made their way downstairs, the house was eerily quiet. They found Robert in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept at all. Good morning, he said softly, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. Daniel nodded stiffly, still unsure how to interact with the man who had raised him, lied to him, and loved him all at once. Ana, sensing the tension, squeezed Daniel's hand supportively. Where is everyone? She asked, looking around the empty kitchen. Robert sighed heavily. Isabella is in her room. She's not taking all of this well. Javier left late last night, but he said he'd be in touch. Maria went to contact Carlos. And Marco. I'm not sure where Marco is. As if on cue, the front door opened, and Marco walked in, looking haggard but determined. I've been at the office all night, he explained. I thought I should be the one to talk to Carlos. To prepare him, before we drop this bomb on his life. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And what gives you the right to make that decision? Marco met his friend's gaze steadily. He's my employee, Daniel. And I think I owe it to him. To all of you. I've been caught in the middle of this for too long. It's time I did something right. Before Daniel could respond, Maria burst through the door, her face pale. Carlos is on his way, she said breathlessly. I told him everything. He wants to meet you all. The next few hours were a blur of activity as the Castillo mansion prepared for the arrival of its long-lost son. Isabella emerged from her room, her usual poise replaced by a nervous energy. Javier returned, his presence adding another layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. And then, just as the sun reached its zenith, a car pulled up in the driveway. Carlos Mendez stepped out, his resemblance to Ana unmistakable. He stood for a moment, taking in the grand facade of the Castillo mansion, before squaring his shoulders and walking to the door. The knock, when it came, seemed to echo through the entire house. Robert moved to answer it, but Daniel held up a hand. No, he said firmly. I'll do it. With Ana by his side, Daniel opened the door to face the brother he never knew he had. For a long moment, the two men simply stared at each other, a lifetime of missed connections and shared blood hanging in the air between them. Then, slowly, Carlos extended his hand. Hello, brother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. As Daniel grasped his hand, feeling the familiar yet strange connection of family, he knew that this was just the beginning. The Castillo family had been irrevocably changed, its foundations shaken to the core. But as he looked at Ana, at the brother he was just beginning to know, and at the complicated, messy, loving family gathered behind him, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. The truth had finally come to light. And in that light, painful though it might be, lay the possibility of healing, of forgiveness, and of a love stronger than any secret. The Castillo family saga was far from over, but for the first time in decades, it was being written in the ink of truth, not in the shadows of lies. And that, Daniel realized, made all the difference. As Carlos stepped into the mansion, ready to meet the family he never knew he had, a new chapter in their shared story began. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and the potential for more pain. But it was also filled with the promise of genuine connection, of relationships built on honesty rather than deception. And as Daniel closed the door behind his newfound brother, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The secrets were out, the lies were exposed, and in their place, a new truth was emerging, one that would redefine the meaning of family for all of them. The story of the millionaire's son and the maid had taken an unexpected turn. But perhaps, Daniel thought as he led Carlos into the living room where their family waited, this new story, one of long-lost siblings, complicated parentage, and the enduring power of love, would be even more extraordinary. As the Castillo family, old and new, gathered to begin the long process of healing and reconciliation, the Los Angeles sun shone brightly through the windows. It was a new day, filled with possibilities and second chances. And for Daniel and Ana, standing side by side as they faced their shared future, it was a reminder that love, true love, could withstand even the most earth-shattering of revelations. Their journey was far from over, but at least now, they were walking the path together, with honesty as their guide and hope as their compass. The end? No, Daniel thought as he looked around at his complicated, messy, beautiful family. This wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning. The Castillo mansion, once a bastion of secrets and lies, now stood as a crucible of truth and reconciliation. As Carlos stepped into the opulent living room, the air crackled with tension and unspoken emotions. All eyes were on him, the long-lost son, the missing piece of this complicated family puzzle. Ana moved forward first, her eyes brimming with tears as she faced her twin brother for the first time. Carlos, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't even know what to say. Carlos offered a small, tentative smile. How about, hello? It's a good place to start. A chuckle rippled through the room, breaking some of the tension. Ana laughed through her tears and, without hesitation, pulled Carlos into a tight embrace. As the twins held each other, years of separation melting away in an instant, the rest of the family watched with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Daniel stood back, his emotions a turbulent mix of happiness for Ana and lingering anger at the lies that had kept this moment from happening sooner. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Javier, his biological father, standing beside him. It's a lot to take in, Javier said softly. Believe me, I know. Daniel nodded stiffly, still unsure how to feel about this man who shared his blood but was a stranger in every other way. Yeah, it is. As Ana and Carlos finally separated, wiping tears from their eyes, Maria stepped forward. Her face was a mask of guilt and longing as she faced the son she had given up so many years ago. Carlos, she began, her voice trembling. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. You're right, Carlos interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. You don't, not yet, but, I'm willing to listen, to try and understand. Maria nodded, grateful for even this small concession. As she began to explain her actions of the past, filling in the blanks of Carlos's origins, the rest of the family listened in rapt attention. The story that unfolded was one of fear, desperation, and misguided attempts at protection, a theme that seemed to run through the entire Castillo saga. As Maria's tale came to an end, Robert cleared his throat. Carlos, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know I'm not your biological father, but I want you to know that you have a place in this family. If you want it. Carlos looked around the room, taking in the faces of these people who were strangers and family all at once. I appreciate that, he said slowly. But I think it's going to take time. For all of us. Isabella, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Time, she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. We've wasted so much of it already. With our lies, our secrets. Then maybe it's time we stopped wasting it, Daniel said, stepping forward. He looked at Carlos, then at Ana, before turning to face the rest of the family. We can't change the past. But we can decide what we do from here on out. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. But as the family began to discuss how to move forward, how to build relationships based on truth rather than deception, a new complication arose. Marco, who had been watching the proceedings with a mix of guilt and relief, suddenly paled. There's something else you all need to know, he said, his voice strained. All eyes turned to him as he continued, the reason I've been so involved in all of this, it's not just because I'm Daniel's friend. It's because, he paused, taking a deep breath before plunging ahead. I'm in love with Isabella. The room erupted into chaos. Robert lunged at Marco, only to be held back by Javier and Daniel. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. And through it all, Carlos watched with wide eyes, wondering what kind of family he had stumbled into. As the initial shock wore off and tempers began to cool, the family found themselves facing yet another difficult conversation. Isabella, tears streaming down her face, admitted that she had developed feelings for Marco as well. I never meant for this to happen, she said, looking pleadingly at Robert. But with everything that's been going on, Marco was there for me. He listened, he understood. Robert, his face a mask of pain and betrayal, turned away. So this is how it ends, he said bitterly. 30 years of marriage, undone by lies and secrets. Daniel, watching his parents' marriage crumble before his eyes, felt a surge of anger. Enough, he shouted, silencing the room. Haven't we had enough of secrets and lies? Of people getting hurt because we're too afraid to face the truth? He turned to his mother and Marco. If you have feelings for each other, then be honest about it. Work through it, but no more sneaking around, no more deception. Then he faced Robert. And you don't get to play the victim here. Your lies started all of this. If you want to save your marriage, then fight for it. But do it honestly. As Daniel's words sank in, a heavy silence fell over the room. It was Carlos who finally broke it, a wry smile on his face. "Well," he said, "I guess family dinners are going to be interesting from now on." The tension broke, and a ripple of laughter spread through the room. As the laughter died down, Ana stepped forward, taking Daniel's hand. "Daniel's right," she said. "We've all made mistakes. We've all kept secrets. But if we want to be a real family, whatever that looks like, we need to start being honest with each other. And with ourselves." Over the next few hours, that's exactly what they did. Painful truths were spoken, long-held grievances aired. There were tears, shouts, and moments of deep, uncomfortable silence. But through it all, a new understanding began to emerge. Robert and Isabella agreed to seek counseling, to see if their marriage could be saved in the light of honesty. Javier and Daniel made plans to get to know each other, to see if they could build a relationship as adults. Ana and Carlos talked for hours, sharing stories and discovering the bond that even years of separation couldn't erase. As the day wore on into evening, the emotional storm began to calm. The family, exhausted but somehow lighter, gathered in the kitchen. Daniel, looking around at the faces of these people, his people, for better or worse, felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in weeks. "So," he said, a small smile playing on his lips, "I guess the wedding's off?" Ana laughed, leaning into him. "For now," she said. "I think we have some family bonding to do first." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Wedding? Do I even want to know?" As Daniel and Ana filled Carlos in on their whirlwind romance and near-disastrous engagement, the rest of the family listened, occasionally chiming in with their own perspectives. For the first time, the full story was told, not as a series of secrets and lies, but as a shared experience, with all its complications and contradictions laid bare. As night fell, the family began to disperse. Carlos left with promises to return, to continue building relationships with his newfound family. Javier departed as well, but not before scheduling a lunch with Daniel for later in the week. Marco, after a tense conversation with Robert, agreed to give the family space while they worked through their issues. In the end, only the core Castillo family remained: Robert, Isabella, Daniel, and Ana. As they sat in the living room, emotionally drained but somehow hopeful, Robert spoke up. "I know I have a lot to make up for," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "To all of you, I don't know if I can ever fully repair the damage I've done, but I want to try. If you'll let me." Isabella reached out, taking his hand. "We all have amends to make," she said softly. "But maybe that's what family is. Not perfection, but the willingness to keep trying, to keep loving even when it's hard." Daniel nodded, pulling Ana closer. "I think you're right," he said. "It's not going to be easy, but I think we're worth fighting for. All of us." As the conversation continued, plans were made. Family dinners that would include Carlos, and eventually Javier. Therapy sessions, both individual and as a family. A commitment to honesty, no matter how difficult it might be. And through it all, a new understanding of what it meant to be a family began to take shape. Not the perfect, polished image they had presented to the world for so long, but something real. Something flawed, complicated, and infinitely more valuable. Weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely, the Castillo family began to heal. It wasn't always easy. There were arguments, setbacks, moments when old habits threatened to resurface. But there were also breakthroughs, moments of connection that would have been impossible in their old life of secrets and lies. Carlos became a regular presence at family gatherings, his quick wit and outsider's perspective often providing much-needed levity. Javier and Daniel forged a tentative bond, built on shared interests and a mutual desire to make up for lost time. Robert and Isabella, after much soul-searching and difficult conversations, decided to give their marriage another chance. It was a work in progress, but for the first time in years, they were truly seeing each other, flaws and all. And Daniel and Ana? Their love, tested by the fires of truth and family upheaval, emerged stronger than ever. They took their time, rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty and shared experience. 1 year to the day after the fateful revelation that had turned their lives upside down, the Castillo family gathered once again in the mansion's grand living room. But this time, there was no tension in the air, no secrets waiting to explode. Instead, there was laughter, conversation, the warm glow of a family that had been through the worst and come out stronger on the other side. As Daniel looked around the room, at Carlos and Ana, deep in conversation, at Javier and Robert, sharing a joke, at Isabella, her smile genuine for the first time in years, he felt a surge of emotion. He caught Ana's eye across the room, and she came to him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled, pulling her close. "I'm thinking that maybe, just maybe, we got our happily ever after. It's not what we expected, but it's real," Ana finished for him. "It's messy and complicated and absolutely perfect." As if on cue, Carlos raised his glass. "To family," he said, his voice carrying across the room. In all its weird and wonderful forms. The rest of the family echoed the toast, glasses clinking as laughter and conversation flowed freely. And in that moment, Daniel knew that they had found something far more valuable than the fairy tale ending they had once imagined. They had found truth. They had found forgiveness. They had found a love that could withstand even the most earth-shattering of revelations. As the evening wore on, Daniel slipped away to the balcony, Ana by his side. They stood together, looking out over the twinkling lights of Los Angeles, the city that had been the backdrop to their extraordinary story. "You know," Daniel said, turning to face Ana, "I think it's time we started planning that wedding again. If you're still interested, that is." Ana's face lit up with a radiant smile. "I thought you'd never ask," she said, pulling him in for a kiss. As their lips met, the sounds of their family's laughter drifting out from the house behind them, Daniel and Ana knew that this was just the beginning of their story. A story of a family reborn, of love that transcended blood and class and long-buried secrets. It wasn't the fairy tale they had imagined. It was better. It was real. And as the stars twinkled overhead, bearing witness to this moment of joy and new beginnings, the saga of the Millionaire's son and the Maid came to a close. Not with the loud drama of secrets revealed, but with the quiet triumph of truth embraced and love renewed. In the end, it wasn't about the lies that had nearly torn them apart. It was about the truth that had brought them together, stronger and more united than ever before. And that, Daniel thought as he held Ana close, was the greatest happily ever after of all.